Hello everybody, welcome to my very first YouTube video. My name is Corey, better known by my screen name online as Garubis, and today my plan is to install for the very first time a custom liquid cooling kit into this computer you see here before you. As you could probably tell based on the fact that it says AMD right there on the heatsink, that this is an AMD 2700X. And I'm looking to get a little bit more overclocking power out of it, so I figured the next best thing, since I can't get any more with air cooling, is to go ahead and install a liquid cooling kit. So today, the kit that I'm going to be installing is actually from EK Liquid Cooling. It is the Liquid 360, and it comes with a CPU water block, 360 millimeter radiator, hence the name Liquid 360. As well as a pump reservoir combo and the three 120 millimeter fans that will be used on the Radiator Cool processor. So with that said, let's get started. The next step is going to be to unbox our kit and see what's inside. There we go. That was way harder than it should have been. Alright, a couple of tabs here. And we're in. Alright, so let's see what we got here. So, first thing here is a concentrate. It's an additive for the water, the distilled water, which is we have right here. That we're going to mix with our distilled water to prevent any kind of algae, any kind of growth. So we'll set that over there. Next, we have our fittings. These are nickel fittings. They are obviously specifically designed for our kit. They are matched with the tubing, which is going to be the next thing I pull out. They are 10 millimeter inner diameter, 16 millimeter outer diameter. That would be very important if you were doing this on your own and trying to piece together a kit as opposed to buying a kit altogether. So I would definitely recommend doing your research if you're going to try to piece together your own kit. Next we have our tubing. Again, this is a 10 millimeter inner diameter, 16 millimeter outer diameter. Black, obviously. Next, we have our pump res combo. So, from what I was reading online when I was researching this kit, this is a very similar pump res combo to what EK Water Black sells out on its own. But it is specially, this particular one is specially designed for this kit. So, I'm curious to see what it looks like. Oh, look at that. It's just a little guy. So, but that should be more than enough for us right now. We are only cooling our processor at this time, although I do have plans to eventually expand and cool my graphics card. But that will be done in a separate video. And then we have some mounting hardware, some tools, as well as a, I believe this is an anti-whirlpool filter, so it prevents the water from swirling around too much, creating air bubbles. Next, we have our pump mount. This is actually an adapter that allows our pump res combo to mount to a 120 millimeter fan mount. Which we are going to take advantage of. There is a spot in the bottom of my case where there currently is no fan mounted, but we are going to go ahead and mount this to that mount instead, and then mount our res combo there. Here we have some cables. We have a pump testing adapter, nothing special. It allows our PWM pump adapter here to connect to a SATA power cable on our power supply. And that actually works in combination with this power supply jumper. This plugs into the 24-pin plug on your power supply and allows you to turn on and off your power supply, getting power to your pump, allowing you to pump or fill your loop as well as do any leak testing without actually powering on your system. This is obviously very good if you were to have any leaks or anything like that, because nothing's powered on, there's no power going to anything. So if there was a leak and any of your stuff got wet, there's a much higher chance that you'd be able to prevent damage because there won't be any electricity actually running through it. And then here we have our PWM fan power adapters. You'll see here there's 3 plugs here, down into 1 PWM adapter. Again, these are for the 3 fans that's going to go on our 360mm radiator. Next, speaking of, we have a fan. It's pretty exciting. It is an F3120, so it's 120mm, 1850 RPM Vardar fan. Vardar is, if you know anything about water cooling, is one of the very best static pressure fans on the market. So again, just one more reason that I really like these kits from EK. Next, we have our, what is this here? Our EK Supremacy Copper Plexi Water Block. So I'm gonna need my knife to get in here again. Okay, so right on the top, looks like we have our mounting hardware. These are the screws that will allow us to mount the CPU water block to the processor and motherboard. Looks like some sort of an additional adapter. My guess is this is probably the AMD adapter because most of these kits come with the Intel hardware pre-installed. And this is the star of the show right here. This is the actual water block itself. See, it's got a black top, clear plexiglass inside. It's kind of hard to see if you guys can see that, but it is copper. And then we also have a little tube of thermal paste that allows us, that will be used when we are mounting this to our processor. And some back plates. These go on the back of the motherboard during the mounting process. So there are 2 additional fans in this box. I'm not going to bother showing you. They're the exact same as the one I just showed you over there. But the last thing other than those that are in the box is our 360mm radiator. So this should be, I went with the 360mm one. It's the biggest radiator that would fit in my case. 2, it should not only be more than enough to cool my current processor, but as I mentioned before, I do eventually intend on expanding this loop to cool my graphics card as well. And the 360mm gives me enough cooling capacity to add my processor to the loop without adding any additional radiators or fans. So to me, that was a huge plus, because now all I have to do is go out and buy a water block for my graphics card, get that installed, pick probably a couple more fittings to go along with it, and depending on how much of this tubing, I might not even have to buy any additional tubing. I may have enough left over here, depending on how everything goes today, to be able to install using leftovers from this kit. First thing we have here on the top of the box, mounting hardware, screws, all that good stuff. And then the only other thing in the box here is the radiator itself, wrapped in some nice bubble wrap and some paper. So let's get this opened up. A little tear there. That's alright, we won't be needing that again. So here we have our Coolstream PE 360mm. We've got an inlet and outlet down here. We got our fan mounts on both sides, actually, depending on how you're going to use it. This is actually going to mount on the top of my case. I'm going to mount the fans on the inside blowing out. I guess I'll show you guys just in case you don't believe me. There are 2 additional fans here that are exactly... No? Okay. That are exactly the same as the fan that I already showed you. And last but not least, the all and ever important instructions. So as you can see here, I don't know if you can see it on the video, but there is a 120, a 240, and a 360 version of this kit. Again, I went with the biggest because it was the best kit to meet my needs and potentially meet my future expansions. So yeah, that is our kit. That is what we're going to be installing today. The next step is going to be to dismantle our case, get the old cooling out, get the processor cleaned off, get the old thermal paste off. We'll most likely be using the thermal paste they provided here. And then we'll get everything mounted up and fill this sucker up, see what she can do. Alright, so we are going to go ahead and get started. We're going to get this sucker taken apart. Really all we're going to need for this is the screwdriver. If there's any other parts that we need along the way or tools along the way, I'll let you guys know. We're going to leave our graphics card in since we're not actually going to be messing with that. Primarily we're going to take this out along with our top fans here, and I might take this fan out as well, just because it might get in the way as we're trying to install the radiator. Our radiator is going to go along the top here. Okay, so we got 3 fans now loose. Let's bring this guy up here. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and take the back panel off, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in regards to cable management. Alright, we'll need that screw to later anyways. Okay, so here's our cable management. Nothing super special, but I'm pretty proud. We got our fan controller here with all of our fans plugged into it. Now I just got to figure out which fan is where so I can disconnect them and get them out of here. 2 fans removed, and this is that 140 millimeter fan that I think I'm going to put in the back here. Luckily the AMD stock cooler is pretty easy to take out. There's a little switch you got to flip back here that loosens up the bracket. Pull it off one side. And away it came. And there's our beautiful Ryzen 2 2700X, which I'm actually going to go ahead and take out because, no, not going to take it out just yet, but we're going to have to get some alcohol and some paper towels to clean that off. Once that's cleaned off, we can begin installation of our water cooling kit. So this is the 120 millimeter fan mounting location that we're actually going to use to mount our pump. And then we're going to have all of our tubes, like our radiator is going to be here, CPU block obviously is going to be here, and then we're going to have our pump down here. Pump reservoir combo, and so the tubes will all run up through here, bang, 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 and then come on back down to here. I'm actually also going to go ahead and take these mounting, if you can't see them, there's some mounting hardware here for the stock cooler, the ones that things for this to clip to. So I'm going to go ahead and unscrew those because our water cooling kit does not use them. And again, I probably won't show it on camera, but the only thing that you need, again, to clean off the thermal paste from your CPU is 70% or higher rubbing alcohol, and ideally something that will not leave any fibers behind, any lint or anything like that. So I usually use paper towel. I've never had a problem with that, but some people might tell you that that's not good. A lot of people recommend something like a coffee filter, which is less apt to leave anything behind. So I don't know if you guys heard that, but once I unscrewed all that, this back mounting plate came off the motherboard, and again, that will be replaced with hardware that came with our new water block. So that is the teardown. Not a whole lot more to it than that. Off camera here, I'm going to go ahead and clean off our CPU and get all of our water cooling stuff together, and we can begin installation. So I'll see you guys then. Okay. Y'all might notice that while I was gone, I got a couple of things done here in preparation of getting all of our hardware mounted into our case. So first of all, I went ahead and mounted our fans to our radiator, but you will notice that only 2 of the 3 fans are mounted. The reason for that is I did a little bit of test fitting, and come to find out, the VRM heat sinks on my motherboard are actually too tall to fit 3rd fans all the way in the back. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to run this now without the 3rd fan. According to the website and all the research that I did on my case, it can support a 360 millimeter radiator, which is absolutely 100% correct. However, the case manufacturer can't take into account the motherboard that you're going to be putting in there. So I guess, the good thing is I'm still going to get 240 millimeters of cooling, with the 2 fans that I am able to run, which would be the equivalent of if I just put a 240 millimeter radiator in there. But even though there may not be a 3rd fan here, just the fact that there are these really tiny little fins that the water will be fed through, there will be some additional cooling, and obviously won't be as good as if there was a 3rd fan on there, but it's better than nothing. The other good thing is I do eventually intend on putting a monoblock, which if you're not familiar with what a monoblock is, so obviously this here is our CPU cooler that we're going to be installing today, and the only thing this cools is the CPU. It does not cool anything else on the motherboard. What a monoblock does is a monoblock water cools not only the CPU, but it also cools the VRM, which means at that time I will be removing the heat sinks, my VRM heat sinks, and installing the monoblock, which means at that time I should be able to install my 3rd fan. So, you know, temporary frustration, but hey, that kind of stuff happens when you're doing goofy things like water cooling. So, not too concerned. You'll also notice that I was correct. That bracket that was in the top of the CPU water block was in fact the AMD bracket. So I had to swap out, if you guys remember, I had this bracket on there. I had to actually remove that bracket and put this one in place. And you'll notice it is actually sandwiched between the water block itself and the copper cooling plate. So they give you this this handy little Allen wrench here. You have to remove these 4 screws, take this all off, take the mounting bracket out, new mounting bracket in, and put the cooling plate back on. Then tighten those back up real nice to prevent any leakage, of course. You should always tighten in a cross pattern to make sure that everything's good and tight. So we got that done. We also got all of our fittings attached. So we have our fittings here, and then fittings on our pump here. Again, they give you an Allen wrench to assist with that. So you basically will start threading it, hand tighten it as much as you can, and then you can use your Allen wrench. It's actually very, very slight little grooves in here that line up with your Allen wrench, and then you just tighten it down. Again, that compresses an O-ring on the bottom of the compression fitting here, making it watertight. So I got all 6 compression fittings installed. Now it's the fun part. Now we get to actually install some things. So I'm going to, oh, that was the other thing I did. I don't know if you'll be able to see it here, but I went ahead and cleaned all the thermal paste off my processor so we can apply our brand new thermal paste along with our CPU cooler. I also removed our RAM because I didn't want it to get damaged while we were installing our radiator, as well as our front cover plate, and I have a DVD burner in here as well. So I removed both of those to give us ample room because we're actually going to feed our radiator up through there. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is install our CPU cooler onto the CPU. When I was taking it apart, you remember there was a back plate that was on the motherboard that actually fell off when I took the screws out. So they give you a replacement back plate along with this this rubber insulator, I guess. So yeah, the rubber insulator will go up against the back of the motherboard, and then they give you these little standoffs here that's going to screw through the motherboard that the water block will mount to. So let's go ahead and get started. The one thing I will warn you about, there are these really small little white plastic washers. So very important to make sure that you install these. So let's go ahead and get it installed. So again, the way this works is I'm actually going to attach the back plate to the back of the motherboard using these standoffs and washers, and then the actual CPU water block is going to screw down onto these little standoffs. So kind of a two-step process. Alright, we got them all started. I'm going to tighten them down. No good now that everything's lined up. Okay. Back plate installed. And if you guys, I'll turn this around real quick so y'all can see what I'm talking about on the back here. So this is the back plate that we just installed. According to the instruction booklet, they wanted to have the rib sided up, so the rib side's up. There are the 4 screws, and we got our little rubber insulator there in between. So we are all good to go there. All right, next, this guy. So before I get this installed, or before you install this, you really want to try to get a good idea how you want the water to flow through your system. So for me, I installed this so that the 2 inlet and outlet would go side by side. Reason for that is the order of operations, the way they want this to flow is pump to radiator, CPU block, back to the radiator. So what I'm going to do, this is our inlet, and we want the inlet coming from the radiator. So I'm going to mount mine like this, and obviously I'm not ready to mount yet. I need to put in my thermal paste. But this is our inlet, this is our outlet. So with my radiator in here like that, I'm going to have my outlet go to here. This is going to go down to my pump, which is going to be down here in the bottom corner. And then from my pump, it's going to come back up to my radiator. And that's going to be my loop. So for me, this is the correct orientation for my water block. And I did take that all into account when I was switching out this metal bracket. Next will be thermal paste. And I apologize if you guys can't see it, but we're going to use thermal paste here provided by EK. You really only want, and I'll put it on and kind of show you, but you don't need a lot. I think a lot of people tend to put too much on, and I was guilty of that in the past as well. You really only need about a pea size or a rice size, like a grain of rice size amount, right in the middle. And even that, I'm sure there'll be people out there that told me I put too much in. You know, I've always been of the mentality that I'd rather too much than not enough, because this is what really makes that airtight seal between the cooler and the CPU itself, to make sure that all of that heat is transferred as efficiently as possible. So I'll give you guys a quick look. So yeah, that's probably a little too much. It's a little bit bigger than, but yeah, it's about the size of a pea or a grain of rice. All right, now let's mount our CPU block. I gotta think again. Inlet, outlet, down to the radiator. Okay, so we're gonna take this. We're gonna put these on those standoffs that we installed earlier. You always want to kind of give it just a little bit of a push, wiggle it around a little bit, make sure we spread that thermal paste around really nice. Then we're going to take these springs, and we're going to put one spring on each of the standoffs. So obviously there's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put one on each corner. And then we have these caps right here. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. And we're going to screw those down on each corner. And again, similar to what I was saying before about when we were putting the when I was talking about reinstalling the bottom of the water block, you want to put these on in alternating corners. So just get each one started, screw them down. And once you have them all started, I'll tip this up for you so y'all can see. So you see here, I don't know if you can see the springs underneath, but I got the caps on each 4 corners. So then I'm just going to go around, tighten these down, and these will bottom out. So once you feel resistance, they are tight, as tight as they need to be. There's no reason to try to turn them any further than that, because there's literally no more thread on the standoff. You've hit the bottom of the thread. That's as tight as it needs to be. So. And last but not least, number 4. So I'm just going to double check, 2. There you go. Water block installed. Now that we have our CPU block installed, the next step is going to be to install our radiator. So as I mentioned before, I've already mounted the 2 fans that are going to fit in my case. Unfortunately, this 3rd fan will not fit due to the size of the VRM. Sorry, I'm just disappointed. So yeah, it will not fit due to the size of the VRM heat sinks that we have installed on our motherboard. So hopefully we're going to be remedying that in the future, but for now, this is what we have to work with. But just so that you guys get an idea of how the process works, to install the fans is pretty straightforward. With the installed longer screws that come in the package with the radiator, you just line your fans up, drop the screw in, and use the included Allen wrench here to tighten them down. Do that on all four corners. Being aware, of course, of which direction the PWM cable is going, because obviously you don't want it coming out in the front of your case up here when obviously it needs to go back through the back of your case to be routed appropriately, assuming you want to do any sort of cable management. So I actually took that all into account when I mounted the two that I mounted. You'll see both my PWMs are coming off the back, and when the radiator is mounted in, that will be the back of my case so they can go back behind. So I'm going to get this fan out of the way, save that for later, and eventually, hopefully, once I get the monoblock to install, we can get that third fan on here. So the one thing I will warn you about, and I fell victim to it, and I'm trying to remedy it now. I can see it. I can see the corner folding down. Do not over tighten these screws. They're very easy to over tighten, and the way these are designed, there's a gap here in the fan where the screw comes through. And if you over tighten it, it'll just start bending this fan down and eventually crack the plastic. I actually heard on one of the corners of the fans that I installed, I actually heard the plastic start to crack, so I wound up backing off all of my screws to relieve some of that pressure. So, as I mentioned before, I've already removed the DVD CD player and the cover for these top two front 5.25 drive bays. So let's go ahead and get this guy in here. So I'm going to feed this through, and due to these front connectors, you can see the front panel connectors here. There's a bit of a tight squeeze right in this top corner. So I actually need to bring mine through a little bit too far, and then back it in to kind of move those cables out of the way. So I'm going to rotate this case a little bit. Alright, and as you can see, these screw holes do not line up with the holes on the top of my case. And I can use the small screws that came with the radiator, which I need to find. And I can use those screws to attach this radiator to the top of my case. So let's go ahead and screw these guys in. And as I mentioned before, yeah, the longer screws you use to mount, I mean, you can use the long screws to mount the radiator to your case if you're going to put the fans on top of the radiator. I like my fans in a push configuration, so the fans are pushing the air out through the radiator, as opposed to if the fans were on top, they would be in a pull configuration, so the fans would be pulling the air through the radiator and out of the top of the case. And if you're doing it that way, you could actually use the long screw, put it through your case, through your fan, into the radiator, and mount it that way. But again, with the way I mounted my fans, I had to use the long screws to mount the fans, and then the short screws to mount the radiator to the case. Alright, and that's the last one. So now that I have all of them in, I'm going to go around and just give each one a little tighten, just to make sure they're good. Alright, and our radiator is now mounted in our case. As you can see right here, here's our fan. And you can see even this middle fan is almost touching. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that is almost touching this VRM, and there's definitely no room for a fan above that. So, hey, it is what it is. We're going to make it work, and, you know, everything doesn't go perfectly every time. So, so we got our CPU block, radiator, and the next one is the pump res combo we're going to mount right down in this location. And we're actually going to mount, you can see there's currently no fan here, but the fan we took out of the back here, we're going to mount in the bottom to be an intake fan as well. Reason being is, so without going too in depth, you want what's called positive pressure in your case to prevent dust from coming in. Every single one of these fan intakes has a dust filter on it. The dust filter has been removed, but here it is. So this slides in the bottom, and that prevents your system from getting dirty. If you have negative air pressure where there's more fans blowing out than there are fans blowing in, dust is going to get pulled in through all these little openings all throughout the case. Positive air pressure keeps more air in the case than outside the case, causing less dust to come in. So since we're now going to have 1, 2, 3 fans blowing out, we currently have 1, 2, 3 fans blowing in. I'm going to add a fourth just to ensure that I had that positive pressure, and it'll lift my pump res combo up a little bit, which is just fine. Now that we have our radiator installed, our CPU block installed, next is to get our pump res combo installed. So, first step is we're actually going to get our pump res combo mounted on the mounting bracket. Once it's mounted there, we're going to mount the whole unit over here to our fan, and then our fan into the bottom of our case. To mount pump res combo to the bracket, you'll need the hardware from the pump res combo box itself. I did do a little bit more research on this little mesh piece here, and according to the instruction manual, it is not required. I was correct that it is to help protect against vortexes, but it's really only required if you have an issue with vortex or too much air inside of your loop. I'm going to try and go without it for now, and if I have issues, I can always install it later simply by unscrewing and installing it. So for now, I'm just going to set that to the side. I'm going to get everything out. I'm going to put it back in the bag. Get everything else out of the bag and set that off to the side. You can see here they give you, again, those little plastic washers. I don't know if you guys can see that. And then little screws. So you put the washer on the screw, and then the screw through the bottom. But before I do that, I am actually going to plan out how this is all going to be mounted once it's inside of my case. So first order of business, I want that fan cable going out the back of my case so I can route it up and connect it to that fan hub that's in the back. So I'm going to orient the fan the way that I would want to orient it in my case. Next, I'm going to orient my pump res combo in the direction that I want it oriented inside of my case. Now, just so happens for me, I want it oriented so both the inlet and the outlet are facing this way. So they'll be facing this way inside the case. That also gives me the advantage, again, of having the cord go out the back of my case, which will help, again, with cable management. So with that done, now I need to plan out what orientation this bracket is going to be in. So in my case, I'm going to match it up with the piece of the mounts on the pump res combo, and then the mounts on the fan. So now I know that I want to mount it in this orientation. So now I can put it on the top, the holes lined up, and now I can take these little plastic washers and the screws, the provided screws, thread the screw through the washer through the mounting hole, and screw it into the pump. Alright, pump res combo mounted. Next, we're going to mount it to the fan. And again, I already have the fan in the correct orientation for how I want it inside of my case. So now I can just place the pump and bracket onto my fan. I have my fan screws right here, and we can just mount, screw these down to the case, or screw this down to the fan. There we go. And now we have a fan pump res combo. Now, next step is to get this mounted inside of our case. So, first thing I'm going to do is turn the case on its side, allowing me access to the mounting holes for the fan. Take the fan and pump res combo, get it into our case facing the correct direction, line up the holes on our fan, and we screw it in. And I'm going to get these fairly well tightened down again. Since we are mounting the pump itself, I would prefer these to be good and tight to help deaden any kind of noise from vibration. So, there you have it. Everything is now mounted in the case. We got our pump res combo down here, got our radiator fans up here, and our CPU block up here. Next and final step before we can actually fill and start testing our loop is to run some tubing. So, I'm going to go through and pull all these fittings off. Well, that is a tight fit back there. Again, with that plastic of our motherboard, hopefully we can get that mounted back on. And we'll take the last two off the CPU here. Okay. So again, I read the instruction booklet. The way they have it going is they want it to go from the CPU outlet, which is this here, down to our pump res combo. From the pump res combo up into our radiator, and then from the radiator back down to our CPU. So that is my plan. So I'm gonna get the tubing, get my tube cutters, and yeah, start routing some tubes. All right, so here you'll see these are my tube cutters. You could probably get away with just a heavy-duty pair of scissors, but these were pretty cheap. I think they were like 10-15 bucks at Lowe's or Home Depot, and I'm always a big fan of having the right tool for the job. I think it makes things a little bit easier. Let's start measuring some tube. I'm actually going to use my cell phone flashlight here to figure out. So this is the in and the out is the lower one. Okay. So in is coming from the CPU. Cut that one a little tight. And actually let it come around the front here. There we go. There we go. One done. So then we're going to go from here. And I'm actually going to bring it out to the front one here. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra slack on this one. I'm going to cut that first one a little too close to comfort. Whew. And make sure to thread on our fittings. Make sure they're facing the right way. There we go. Yeah, so that's got a little more leeway. It's kind of short, but it is what it is. Again, we'll leave ourselves just a little bit of extra length here. And you'll see, we actually have a decent amount left over. So, again, if I want to put my GPU water block on here, I may have enough. I don't know. We'd have to see when the time came. Okay. That's our loop, my friends. Okay. Yeah, we'll just make sure everything is good and tight and screw them down. All right, everybody. Sorry about that. If you noticed any kind of a weird cut where I was stopped in the middle of the build process, that would be because the battery on my camera died. So I do apologize for that. But while I was waiting for it to recharge, I finished up a little bit of housekeeping, if you will, on the case. As you can see here, I finished all my tubing. I got my RAM back in, did a little bit of cable management just to get everything cleaned up, and we are now ready to fill and test our loop, see if we have any leaks. So before we actually fill and test, let me explain my loop to you. So, oh hi! Alright, thank you, baby. Got myself a nice whiskey and ginger here, and it's delicious, thank you. So, again, back to where we were. If you follow the loop order, I'll start at the pump reservoir here. So the pump, this is the so the pump goes out, follows up into the reservoir, or excuse me, into the radiator, then out into the CPU, then out of the CPU, back down into our pump. That is our loop. So all that is left now is for us to. I already mixed up our fluid with the concentrate that EK sent. So, yeah, no time like the present. Oh, I should also mention, I hooked up a separate power supply to run basically to do the filling with. So I hooked up that adapter I showed you earlier that will power this while the computer's off. And also I attached that jumper that also came with the kit that allows the power supply to turn on without it turning on the rest of our components. So I figured, yeah, the best way to make sure that no power is going to any of our components while we test this loop is to use an entirely separate power supply. So got myself a funnel, and we're going to start filling. So the plan here is fill the reservoir just about to the top. This might be a bad idea. That might have been a little bit too much. That's okay. And then power this on. All right. And yeah, and you just pretty much repeat that process. While also keeping your eye out for any leaks, which I don't see anything yet, so we'll keep chugging along. The most important thing that you want to pay attention to when you're doing this is you do not want to let your pump run dry. So once the liquid has pretty much all left the reservoir, you want to make sure to turn that off as quickly as possible, because the liquid is actually what lubricates the pump itself. So if it runs dry, you could have issues. I'm still not seeing any leaks, surprisingly enough. Although speaking of, I will mention that one thing you definitely want to do before you start this process, before the testing and filling process, is double check all your fittings. Double check all these compressions are tightened down as tight as they can go. And the funny thing is, before I started filming again, I actually was doing that myself, and I found that this fitting right here, not only was it not tightened down, it was completely off and had slid down the tube all the way back to my reservoir. So again, it's a really good idea to double check all that before you start trying to run water through your system. Holy cow, there we go. And as you can see, so I can now leave this on, and it's generally a good idea to kind of leave it set up like this for a period of time, and just keep an eye out for any leaks, because you never know, it may not pop up right away. But you'll also notice, if you pay really close attention here, I'll try to move this without affecting, I don't want to dump this, but there's little tiny air bubbles down in here, and so we're just going to let this run as all the air works its way out of the system. And then once all that air is out, we'll top it off one last time, fill her up, and she should be good to go. Should be ready to roll. Yeah, I'll check back with you guys once all the air bubbles have worked their way out and we're up and running. And if everything looks good, I'll get this sucker hooked up, booted up, and we'll start running some stress tests on it and see just how much more we're going to be able to overclock over what we're able to get out of our air-cooled system. All right, so computer is all set up. I did some leak testing, let it run for a while, and so far so good. So I think it's time that we turn this beast on and see what we can do as far as overclocking. So let's go. Okay, well, the monitor's turned on. All right. So first, so far so good. We have a splash screen, and we can get into our BIOS. Excellent. So as you can see here, based off our previous benchmarks, we are running at 4.1 gigahertz. Memory is running at 3133. Overclocked beyond even what it's advertised as, so that's always a plus. So let's boot into the OS, make sure everything comes up, and then we'll reboot and start our overclocking. See how far we can push this thing. So here we are. We are in the OS. Let's open hardware monitor. See how we're looking for temperatures. So it looks like we got 36, 37 degrees idle. Wow, just jumped to 45, but it's because we're loading Discord and doing some other things. So yeah, now we've kind of settled back down. 30, 31, 30. Yeah, now it's just dropping 28. So once everything boots up and settles in, man, that temp just drops. Let's restart and see what we can get for some overclocks. So I should also mention, I don't know if you guys can tell through the glass in my case, but I did actually run into an issue. If you recall, I was not able to fit the third fan on my radiator, and because that fan was not hooked up, I was actually getting a CPU fan error, which is preventing my PC from booting every time it would try to turn on. So what I did is I actually propped the fan inside the case, and again, I don't know if you guys can see it over here, and I have the fan currently aimed directly at the VRMs. Hopes that with the hopes that I can continue to get additional airflow over the VRMs, keep those cool as I continue to overclock. I figured since I wasn't able to use it on the radiator to keep the CPU cool, the next best thing would be to try and keep the VRMs cool. So just wanted to throw that out there in case any of you guys can actually see into the case and notice a random fan just kind of sitting here. So let's go overclock. Just to test our stability here, I'm just gonna run a Cinebench, see what our results are. As you can see, I was actually able to get this test to complete with 4.2 gigahertz Ryzen, and we're gonna give this a minute because I gotta close out everything to make sure that this is getting the best shot that it can. So let's throw our hardware monitor over here. You can see we're having right around 30 degrees, and let's run it. And it froze. That's why we test. Just because you get into the OS doesn't mean that it's stable. Okay. Let's see what we can get this time. Hey guys, sorry about that weird cut there at the end of my overclocking section. I didn't realize that my video camera had stopped recording, so I lost a whole bunch of footage that I thought I had taken. So instead of re-recording the process of me going through my BIOS and tweaking our settings and running some benchmarks, I decided instead just to collect the data, throw it up on the screen in the form of some graphs, discuss it, take it from there. I will mention, however, that I was able to get that Cinebench test to complete successfully, so that was nice. After that, I went on to continue to tweak my settings, playing around with voltages and core clocks, and running a set of benchmarks, which is where I got my results from. So without further ado, let's move on to those benchmarks and results. So here you can see we have some average temps from before we installed the water kit, as well as for multiple core clocks and voltages after the installation of our water kit. Unfortunately, I forgot to run our OCCT test, which was a 10-minute test after setting 4.1 gigahertz on our water cooler. But you can also see that after increasing our clock speed up to 4.2 gigahertz, I was able to actually reduce our temps once I went down to 1.35 volts. I do have to say I was really surprised with how high the temperatures were when I left the settings to auto voltage at 4.2 gigahertz. But I was also really pleased with the temperature improvements once I dropped down to 1.35 volts. I'll also mention that while it's not listed here, I was able to get the system to boot and complete a handful of these benchmarks at 4.3 gigahertz. But unfortunately, I had to run at 1.45 volts, which was just too high, and I didn't really feel comfortable running too many stress tests on it because I knew that that was too many volts for me to continue to run at. So I decided just to go up to 4.2 gigahertz at 1.375 volts, leave it there, and just be comfortable running that as my daily driver. On this slide, you're going to see the results of a couple of benchmarks. For each test, the Cinebench and the blender, I ran each test 3 times and took the average. Again, as you can see, I was somewhat surprised to see the performance improvement from 4.2 gigahertz with auto to the 4.2 gigahertz with 1.375 volts. I wasn't surprised to see the temperatures go down, but I was surprised to see that there was an increase in performance as well. So in conclusion, I'm really happy with the results that I got. I was hoping that I'd be able to push it just a little bit further and maybe be able to run a stable 4.3 daily driver, but unfortunately, again, because of the amount of volts that I had to pump into the processor, I wasn't comfortable running it there. So rolling it back to our 4.2 gigahertz, looking at the temperatures and performance I'm getting out of it now, I'm very, very happy. So on a related note, I've mentioned throughout the video that one of the reasons I was looking forward to installing this kit was that it gave me an opportunity to potentially expand the loop and include a GPU water cooler. And I had so much fun installing this that I went ahead and ordered one. So that kit should be arriving later this week. I hope to get it installed, record the process, and make another video for you guys. I apologize for the length of this video, but I had a ton of fun making it, and hopefully somebody out there will find this useful for their own water cooling project. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know down in the comments, and until next time, cheers.